Acha. But necessary propositions, which are either necessarily true propositions or necessarily proper false propositions, are not regarded as proper propositions. So, proper propositions are contingent propositions, and necessary propositions, which are either necessarily true propositions or necessarily false propositions, these are not included within proper propositions. Now, Wittgenstein, while discussing about necessarily true propositions or necessarily false propositions, is not completely deviating from the standard uses. During the period of the Tractators, Wittgenstein was very much influenced by the paradigm of Principia Mathematica of truth functional logic particularly. And according to the basics of the truth functional logic, truth value of a compound proposition is dependent on the truth value of its constituent elementary propositions. Now, in the case of necessarily true proposition, which is also called a tautologous proposition, would come out to be true in all cases of truth value assignment in the final column, irrespective of the truth value of its constituent elementary propositions. And similarly, in the case of necessarily false proposition in the final column. Now, according to Wittgenstein, neither tautologous propositions nor self-contradictory propositions are admissible within the fold of proper propositions, for these propositions do not represent any situation of the world. These propositions cannot represent any existing or non-existing combinations of objects. Propositions against a quotation. What a picture represents is its sense, according to 2.221. And since neither tautology nor contradictory propositions represent anything, these propositions are, according to Wittgenstein, without sense. So, tautologies and contradictions are without sense. Now, gradually, we are trying to capture the very notion of sense that we obtained from Wittgenstein. Now, the first sense that is proper propositions, propositions which are called by him proper propositions, which represent reality. So, proper propositions are contingent propositions, and he shows that propositions which are tautologous or contradictory, they do not represent a situation of the world, and so these are without sense. And in 4.4611, this is also interesting. Wittgenstein has asserted tautologies and contradictions are not, however, nonsensical. So we are ready with two concepts, one of without sense and the other nonsense. This is that 4.461. Here, this is the first appearance in the Tractators of the word sinnlos, which gets translated as lacks sense or senseless. And for Wittgenstein, it stands in contrast to Unsinn, which gets translated as nonsense. So Unsinn, nonsense. and so at least at this stage we find in the Tractatus Wittgenstein is in favor of maintaining a distinction between propositions without sense and propositions being nonsense. Now, naturally, so tautologies and contradictions are not, however, nonsensical. Naturally, how these two sorts of quite apparently similar qualifications with without sense and nonsense, one is affirmatively attributed to tautologies and contradictions, and the other is denied of tautologies and contradictions. And in the Tractatus, expressions without sense and nonsense are not suggested. Only this much we get from these two propositions from the Tractatus. We don't know whether there is any kind of relation otherwise, or we can put them in a hierarchical order. That point has not yet been discussed in these sections of the Tractatus. So, without sense and nonsense in any language whatsoever, whether natural or artificial, there are rules to account for the well formed formulae of that language. In modern terminology, these rules are characterized as syntactical rules which are peculiar to each and every language. The expression logical syntax, this is also available in the Tractatus 3.325, where it has been used by Wittgenstein as synonymous with logical grammar and also frequently in propositions, in many other propositions. Without entering into the details of these propositions, we may try to sum up the main gist to be relevant for our present discussion. In the first place, his use of the expression logical in the compound expression logical syntax with logical in italics indicates Wittgenstein's preference for distinguishing logical syntax from the ordinary grammatical syntax. This was the phase when he was determined to unearth ideal sign language with a well-formed ideography to cure philosophy from confusions of ordinary language. And secondly, his notion of logical syntax is as follows. This is also, this quotation I derived from his logical form in some remarks on logical forms. By syntax, in this general sense of the word, I mean the rules which tell us in which connections only a word gives sense, thus excluding nonsensical pseudo propositions. Now, in the preface to the Tractatus, this is also quite known to us. In the preface to the Tractatus, Wittgenstein's remark, the whole sense of the book might be summed up in the following words. What can be said at all can be said clearly, and what we cannot talk about, we must consign to silence. Closed was a baffling one. What really does Wittgenstein intend to convey by this statement? 1. Was Wittgenstein during the Tractarian period a hardcore philosopher of language, trailing the path of Frege Rassen's logico-linguistic trend? 2. Was he at the core of his heart a mystic who was struggling for a voice? The most important discovery of the 20th century analytic philosophy is the view that philosophical problems may be solved or dissolved either by the analysis of language or by understanding more about the language we use. Wittgenstein remarked, philosophy consists of logic and metaphysics. Logic is its basis. Russell was of the opinion that the new logic that he had devised with Whitehead is a logically perfect language fit to mirror the logical form of facts. Frege also held that in a properly constructed language, no fuzziness could occur at all. Now, Wittgenstein trod the path of Russell and Frege in favoring a language with its transparent syntax. This much is clear. Of course, whether he actually was in favor of following a perfect language or was he in favor of following ordinary language in its own shape, whether he was interested in discovering the logic from the ordinary language as it was available, these are questions. But at least Wittgenstein writes that in order to avoid such errors, of course, he was also very much bothered by the problems that philosophy faces. So, in order to avoid such errors, we must use a sign language that is governed by logical grammar, by logical syntax. So, we cannot altogether deny that he also had accepted to a certain extent the what we can say the perspective of Russell and Frege, but not wholeheartedly. Now, Wittgenstein has taken the notion of analysis in the sense of decomposition of something in its constituents, and the Tractatus thrives on the thesis that the sense of propositions be determinate, and it is well understood that the requirement that simple signs be possible is the requirement that the sense be determinate. So the thesis of determinacy of sense was also accepted by Wittgenstein. The Tractarian idea of analysis thus is closely linked with the idea of determinacy of sense. Every proposition according to the Tractatus is built up from elementary propositions in such a way that the truth or falsity of the whole proposition is determined by the truth or falsity of its component elementary propositions. Wittgenstein has equated philosophy with attempts to say the unsayable and has traced its source to our failure. And wherein lies our failure? According to Wittgenstein, it lies in our failure to grasp the logic of our language. And according to Wittgenstein, most of the propositions and questions to be found in philosophical works are not false but nonsensical. So the basic assumption of the Tractatus thus consists in upholding the thesis of determinacy of sense, which implies that a proposition only has a sense if it has an absolutely determinate sense. A meaningful proposition must be either true or false with respect to every possible situation. There must be no truth value gaps, no possible situations in which the proposition would be neither true nor false. Given the nature of language as determinate in sense and the function of language as picturing, Wittgenstein proceeds to make an important pronouncement about the limits of so-called language. Now the Tractatus works towards sharply delineating limits of thought by delineating the limits of language, by distinguishing meaningful propositions from the realm of nonsense and what is without sense. And Wittgenstein, his important remark, the limits of my language means the limits of my world. But the problem again has been created by Tractatus itself. Though he adheres to determinacy of sense, but he also speaks about something. He admits, he talks about something which cannot be explained by the limits of the thesis that he supports, that is the thesis of determinacy of sense. Now, in this connection, I thought I would also refer to some of the interesting part which are we are generally neglected when we study the Tractatus. Now this important aspects of the text, that we need to put some attention to these important aspects of the text, has been highlighted by Ray Monk, The Duty of a Genius, in his wonderful book, The Duty of a Genius. One is its dedication part and the other is its motto part. And it is very interesting, and very recently I have seen in the internet, though I could not find the thesis, but I have found that someone has worked just on the motto and submitted PhD dissertation on the motto of the Tractatus. I think that would be a really very interesting work. But I haven't seen till now that thesis in its published form. Now, in the dedication part, dedicated to the memory of my friend David H. Vincent, who was killed in a flying accident. Now, in a letter to Russell, now this is important, this dedication part is important. And in this connection, I would like to provide some lines from Wittgenstein's letter to Russell, where he writes, "Every day I think of Vincent. He took half my life away with him." Now, actually, Wittgenstein's engagement with philosophy in a logical way, what it suggests, that Wittgenstein's engagement with philosophy in a logical way, which he of course corroborates when he suggested the title of his book to be in that way, De Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. It would be a treatise on logic or philosophy written in a logical way. He could not defile his living soul, because when he is saying that every day I think of Vincent, he took half my life away with him. And another is the motto part. Now, in the motto, Tractatus, in the motto part, it is written, "And whatever a man knows, whatever is not mere rumbling and roaring that he has heard, comma, can be said in 3 words." This was written in the motto. Generally, we omit the motto section of the Tractatus. And this motto, this quotation, he took from Kunzberger, an Austrian writer. Now, what actually is there in the motto? How can we try to understand the very meaning of this motto? And before that, we also need some clarification why a motto was added to the text. What is the purpose of adding a motto to a text? Now, there may be different answers, but one of the answers which I think and which I believe is the right answer, that a motto can represent the perspective of the author. Otherwise, there is no point in quoting a motto or writing a motto before a text. So, which particular perspective is being reflected from this motto? Now, first, this motto, first, if we try to read thoroughly this motto, that whatever a man knows can be said in 3 words. Now, in the first place, whatever a man knows can be written in 3 words, and in between it adds, whatever is not mere rumbling and roaring that he has heard. So, is it not suggesting some kind of limitation of human knowledge? That human knowledge knows, the very range of knowledge is quite limited. Range of knowledge is not quite, we can say, quite expansive, because, and also limitation of expressibility, that is limitation of language. Now, why there is limitation of language? Because whatever human mind knows can be written in 3 words. So, it suggests some kind of limitation of human language, limitation of human knowledge, and limitation of its expressibility. And also, if we try to read between the lines of this motto, is this not suggesting a kind of distinction between, say, of course I am using here Kantian expression, between phenomena and noumena? Knows, whatever man knows, and there are many rumblings and roarings heard, but these are not incorporated within knowledge. So, phenomena, noumena distinction may be there, and also we can say that maybe the distinction between the realm of sense and non-sense that was drawn by Wittgenstein in the Tractators later on.